think you've all had excellent sessions in the morning and also one now in terms of the panel. I'm not a fiber expert, so it will be at a much slower pace from a fiber point of view. I think if I speak to people who are like myself and not really fiber experts, I'd like to introduce you to the guy who was worried about bridging the distance gap. This guy's name is Alec Reeves. He used to work for a company that eventually became Nortel, and Nortel Networks eventually went belly up. But one of the interesting things that he was worried about was how to carry voice across a distance, and the problem with amplification of those voices was, of course, when you amplify the noise as well, and the voice clarity doesn't become quite as good as it was when the person spoke. And he invented what they called PCM, pulse code modulation. That was in 1937. Fast forward to 1973, he's sitting with a couple of guys here and trying to sort out the distance gap again. They invent what is now known as fiber optics. So full circle almost to this talk, which is fiber. What I like about Alec Reeves is he invented a technology that is one of the first technologies that we would consider exponential. An exponential technology, and where that term comes from, was an observation made by a guy called Roy Moore, and we know it as Moore's law. But Moore, when he was working, discovered that the number of transistors that you can fit onto a board every 2 years doubled. What that meant for Intel at the time and up till now is you're able to start doubling how much capacity you can give every 2 years, or half the cost of something every 2 years. Fiber as a technology and as an exponential technology, I think fits into being abused by Moore's law. There is a downside to Moore's law, and just to explain this graph a little bit, we think in a linear fashion, and by linear it means every year we expect to improve a specific amount, and that a specific amount is based on the year that we live. And we were taught throughout primary and high school, and we expect it of our kids, and we do New Year's resolutions, and we have this linear expectation that life is going to work out quite well. So quite a steady curve. What Moore's law says is if a technology starts doubling in either capacity or halving in price, every 2 years you will start to see an exponential nature to that curve. So if we invented voice in 1937, 2 years from that, it would become twice as fast and twice as fast, and eventually kind of hockey stick, as you can see in that picture. What's interesting about what Peter Diamandis observed with exponential growth and linear thinking is until it gets to a point where we would consider it meeting our expectations, because our expectations are linear, we live in kind of a disappointing or disappointed world. So as great as it was that he finally digitized voice in 1937, our expectations were either not verbalized or deceptive. After a period of time, see where we go, in 1973, when fiber optics happened, we also had mobile coming about. And again, you know, mobile isn't not rocket science at the time that it was done, still under our expectations and what it can do. But from a 45-year period, halving that, we all of a sudden had the advent of texting. Texting came about as moving from 1G to 2G, but also on the fixed lines, we also had DSL kind of come about. I'm not sure what we expected to do with DSL and with texting, but it wasn't really groundbreaking. We just had internet relay chats. Geeks could chat with other geeks. Not really groundbreaking. In the 2000s, though, we started to see 3G coming about. The ability to now carry multimedia. And ADSL also coming about. But ADSL did not go in the direction that I will argue fiber is going to go, which is it didn't quite meet our expectations of being connected all the time. And really it was about price point. We finally got rid of that sound that the modem made, but that's just about it. But that time again now, between 1990 and 2000, is really shortening. And the next shortening is when I think 4G happened and the advent of the smartphone. That's the first time that I think our expectations from what we can get from a digital voice were matched by this exponential technology that started way back in 1937. So with 4G, we moved up to a point where we said it's a bit too costly and we need to bring that cost down, and that's demonetization. And that, I would say, in about 2011 or so was the first commercial takeoff of fiber. But fiber, in my view, grows up, becomes amazing. We start using it as a disruptive technology and start bringing down costs next year, which is 2019 from now. And then from there, we want to go to dematerialization. How can we get rid of the physical fiber, maybe, or the limitations that our current fiber looks like? And then from there is democratization. The speakers earlier on also spoke about where fiber is going and the future of fiber, and it really is fiber for all. So that's when you're in that democratization. Or rather, instead of saying fiber for all, I'd say this digitized voice for all. When fiber grows up, why I argue that it's next year, and I've tried to redact this graph as much as possible, is fixed wireless has been running for about the last 10 years. But fiber in a shorter period, which is about 5 years, is now reaching, or last year reached a point where its number of connections started exceeding fixed wireless's number of connections. That hasn't happened in the DSL world. So this is why we have companies like OpenServe, because they can see as well that fiber next year, the number of connections will now exceed the number of connections that we get from a telecom ADSL line. And that really is the magic. I think that's when fiber kind of grows up. As that has been happening, as with exponential technologies, they're not just being used for one thing, they're being used for many things. And one of the other things that have started growing up in this period, especially when fiber was around, is the Internet of Things. There's a lot of assumptions and a lot of guesses on the number of connections that will come about from an IoT point of view, some estimating 20 billion, some estimating as much as 50 billion, but whoever you're listening to, the numbers are in billions. I don't know if this is clear enough, but what I find interesting on the top part, which is the consumer IoT bit, is if you look at the bottom of that, that's everything fiber. So you're talking about smartphones, set-top boxes, gaming consoles. But when you look at the top bit, you're seeing 4.6 billion things that are not going to be connected using fiber. And this is something that I think fiber companies need to bear in mind, or ISPs need to bear in mind. Below that, when we look at businesses themselves, we see kind of the same pattern where a few of those key things, those key connections, aren't rooted to a fixed location. In that case in point, we can see fleet management. So that kind of brings us to the first dilemma if you're thinking about fiber and where fiber goes when fiber grows up in 2019. And if you look at this picture here, the first dilemma that you run into is that in a fiber world, the people fiber is servicing are not geostationary. That means we spend a bulk of our time outside of the home. In that picture, we actually spend quite a lot of time driving and in our offices. And from a fiber point of view, you need to consider that about 60% of your time is not really going to be spent at a fiber source. There are a couple of technology choices that an ISP can look at, including fiber, but to more illustrate this bridging the distance gap is now we have brought in another element to it called power. Because if you're not always at home and if you're en route, then we need to look at things like battery power. That does shine. So if fiber is the best thing and it's going to grow up over here, it's only going to grow up really for geostationary and always powered devices. We've heard about things like 3G, we've talked about things like fixed wireless and Wi-Fi, and in my talk I'm going to try and introduce a little bit of the guys that can play away from a geostationary zone. The second dilemma, which then is presented by these not geostationary people, is that they always want to be connected. So we've got a not stationary world that wants to constantly be connected to everything under the sun. Want to be connected to your house, to your car, to your kids. But you're living in a world where you've got so much information, but that dilemma is then you're the last person to know. So you're not stationary, you're running all over the show, but you're the last person to know about anything that happens. And that's an interesting opportunity, I think, for fiber companies. So how can a fiber company address these no longer stationary and always connected people? We've had lots of chats about 5G, and I think 5G is a great technology. I think it is going to live up to a use case once the use case is understood and how to roll that out. But again, I steal from the Africa analysis and its view of fiber take-up, of 5G take-up and the number of connections it expects from how it's kind of going now remains flat until that point where we see fiber overtake the DSL connections. But even then, we don't yet see the exponential curve happening. So into 5 years from now, 5G will still not be as prevalent as we want it to be. So from an ISP point of view, if you're trying to address this market that is no longer as stationary as they used to be, but are so used to being connected that they want to be connected all of the time, I think looking at a mobile broadband strategy might not be the best one. But back to our bridging the gap problem, I think another one that we can look at is low power WAN. Because when we bring in that element of battery power, what we do is we then speak about a wireless network that can be as efficient as possible when it comes to using low power. The cost of sensors has dropped. At the time that we put this slide together, which was 2015, that cost had dropped by half to $20, 20 US dollars. There was a challenge that brought that cost down to $2, and that is what Sigfox is based on, using sensors that are $2. And as of last year, we have seen a 20 US cents chip. And this is the exponential part of sensors happening, and we've seen it also happening in the bandwidth part, of course, but also in cloud computing. Cloud computing has dropped to such a point that it is cheaper for you to store and process your data in the cloud rather than on the ground. So I think a fiber company can use LPWAN to start addressing that not stationary but always connected crowd. So the good news from a Sigfox point of view is that it also addresses the too much information bit. Because if you're connecting everything all of the time, you cannot see, you know, the wood from the trees, as they say. The way that the device makers are connecting using Sigfox is they're connecting using event-based. When a condition is met or when a condition is violated, a tolerance has been exceeded, only then do you send a message, and you send a simple message. Think of it as a binary message. Am I on or am I off? Did I move or did I not move? Did the lights change? Did the temperature drop? We do this by putting up base stations, lots of base stations throughout the country that can pick up any of these signals and deliver that information into the cloud. What we then consider ourselves as doing is building an open access wireless network and an open access ecosystem beyond just the connectivity part. If you are looking at LPWAN, we have over 500 products that you can today just buy and use. And in the country, we've got over 50 channel partners, most of which you're probably already working with, who can then help you in terms of your IoT journey. So how then does a fiber company bundle LPWAN? I think the first is, and again I punt the Sigfox pitch, is choose something that can give you the same service level agreements that you give your customers. What we give you from a Sqwidnet point of view is we give you a national coverage network. It is a wireless network of the 868 frequency, which means it's a free frequency. What that means is we cover over 85% of the population, and that number grows daily based on activations. The nice thing about Sigfox is they are in 45 countries, so that means beyond South Africa, you do not have to make any deals with any roaming agreements. You do not have to pay for roaming. Just by using a Sigfox-enabled device, you already have global reach in any one of those 45 countries, from America, Europe, all the way through to Japan, Australia. So if we're going to bundle LPWAN as a ISP and look at how do we put fiber together with LPWAN, I think setting boundaries or responsibilities should be a first task that kind of keeps it easy and clean for you as an organization. Visibility is one end of what we want to do in terms of connectivity, and then automation can be the other end of what we want to do. And we can assign IoT to the visibility part of that world, and we can then assign fiber to the automation part of that world. And I think if we just keep those two together, then it's quite easy for a fiber company to see how they can supplement and get to these customers that are no longer stationary, but wanting to always be connected, but also in a fashion that is event-based, that is condition sensitive rather than just too much information. So if fiber does that for us in terms of the 6Ds, where do we go to then in terms of dematerialization? And that's my argument, is we can use LPWAN to do that. Just a couple of examples, and there's a lot that happens in the company. Like I said, 500 products, and in the country, 50 channel partners. But I thought, let's look at fiber beyond the city, and what would that kind of look like? A few examples that we have over there is, if you're using a LPWAN technology, you can, for example, in something like a vehicle, we'll go to that top one, you can detect if somebody's using a jamming signal. One of the problems with a mobile is thieves know that it can be jammed when something's in transit, and you can then piggyback off an LPWAN network to get a message to your fiber network to say there is intrusion being detected, and then from a fiber point of view, you can switch your cameras on. So you no longer have your cameras on all the time, you just switch them on when there's kind of activity happening over there. Another example I've kind of talk about a little bit is water leaks. Trying to prevent a geyser from bursting from a house point of view is quite simple, but how do we detect leaks when it comes to a city? And these bulk meters or pipes kind of running down the side of a street don't have power, and that's where LPWAN can kind of come in. With these very cheap sensors, we can detect water flow and notify whoever needs to be notified, who's sitting on a fiber network, and then from that fiber network, dispatch or act or automate towards that. Another example maybe would be garbage, and what I like about garbage is it's all about routes. So when the garbage gets full, because it has no remote, it has no power, it's remote, we can put in sensors, and they're available today, that will tell you when that garbage can is full. Municipality then dispatches their cars, and we can let the municipality know who runs the dump or the material recycling facility, which trucks have gone to where to pick up what, so that we can start queuing those trucks as they come back into the facility and not cause a build-up on the weighbridge or stinks for the people who live near that area. This also then can be extended into the business, and when I say fiber beyond the business, it's not outside of the business, but just beyond what fiber is capable of within a building. We can start looking at things like putting in soil moisture detectors into plants, and knowing when those need to be hydrated, and then onto our fiber network and our Wi-Fi network, setting off mini sprinklers that kind of just fan those lovely little trees with some rainwater. We could detect temperature, and from temperature decide to open or close roofs in a business, or just detect lights and how much light is coming into an area and switch off those lights. So again, always looking at visibility, looking at what is possible in terms of the network, and then getting that message through to somebody who has far more capability, which is automating it from a fiber point of view. And then finally, when we look at the home, this is kind of what home users are going to be expecting next year or as we go along, because these exponential technologies, what they bring about as a consequence is choice. We start understanding more, we start demanding more, and one of the things that I think will be demanded quite quickly is smoke detectors. When you now start understanding that the smoke detector in your house hasn't been working for the last 2-3 years, if you have a smoke detector, if you look at the stats in terms of fire, over 75% of fires could be prevented if there was just a working smoke detector. Even though you're in a house that has fiber, you can't connect your smoke detectors up to your fiber network, not even to your Wi-Fi network because of battery, but something like a low power network allows you to have a smoke detector run for decades, and that's 10s and 20s of years. When that triggers, you can now automatically switch on heat-seeking technology and even deploy, you get one of those gushes of carbon dioxide into a room to try and snuff out a fire. We did talk about the geyser leaks, but just to highlight a little bit more about what the guys did in terms of the geysers, they were able to use a lot of hybrid technology there. So the geyser itself is autonomous, does not need any connectivity. It is able to sense temperature above 65 degrees and can switch itself off if the temperature is above 65 degrees and notify your insurer or the homeowner. When the temperature drops below 40 degrees, it switches itself on again because it's self-regulating. But if there's water that starts dripping from the geyser into the drip tray, it then goes into a complete shutdown and notifies again the insurance company or yourself. So that's an example of an autonomous device using LPWAN to communicate to insurance company, and what then the fiber company can do is make those available and build things like automation into that. Automatic dispatch of a plumber. And there's many other examples that we could look at. One of my favorite ones is the pool. You can sense with the current technology that's there now, the pH levels that are in the pool. You can even detect how much UV is coming onto the pool with these simple sensors. And if you feel it not safe for your children, okay, it won't be a house like this, maybe one with a fence, you can auto unlatch the pool, which means the pool is safe to use, of course, if they can swim. And again, we can see the garbage is full kind of example. So really, the talk is about using LPWAN to make something visible, supplement the fiber business as an ISP when fiber grows up next year, and then using fiber and all of those technologies like Zigbee and Wi-Fi to do what they do best, which is to automate. But before I leave, I wanted to leave you with a local example. There's a company called Real Telematics. Real Telematics is right here in Durban. They started out with forklifts and fridges. They're a great engineering firm, and what they've built is a power failure detection unit. That's a very complicated way of saying they made a device that costs way under 1,000 Rand and comes in between the appliance that you're worried about and the socket. This is particularly interesting for even fiber companies that have data centers that are out in the sticks, and you just want to know, is it a power failure that caused the fiber not to run or not? And you can get those answers. You don't have to go and build fancy dashboards. Of course, you are able to because Sigfox is an open access network, but you can do it as simple as using an SMS, or just outside, I met a crew that does it using WhatsApp. So you can actually start instructing your device if it's still power capable using WhatsApp commands. Okay, so as Sigfox and as Sqwidnet, we drive innovation across all industries. This was just one illustration of how low power WAN can be used to supplement a fiber business, but from below the ground, things like mining and open cast mining, to above the ground, agriculture, tracking down herds of buffalo, rhino, into manufacturing, logistics, and all the way through to the examples that we talked about today, which is the home. Thank you for listening.